Recently, Macungie Township purchased 190 acres of prime farmland. This is known as the Weiner Tract, but it was formerly the Jarrett land.
About 5 or 6 years ago, Lower Macungie Township started to get serious again about preserving some of the remaining farmland that we have in the township. We have some of the best and most important soil quality, not only in the region, but in the state, and some argue the nation. The township decided to draft an official map that outlaid a number of priorities for preservation. One of the most important priorities that we had was the Weiner farm, which was most recently owned by the fellow's name was Doc Weiner and his family estate. It was about 190 acres. And so this was one of the top 3 priorities in the entire township in terms of importance, again, because of that excellent soil quality, but also the fact that it was very much, up until the moment it was preserved, in danger of being lost to development. We started negotiating with the son-in-law of Doc Weiner and Jean Weiner. They expressed an interest in preserving this farm instead of developing it, and we worked with them to actually acquire the property. Of the 190 acres, about 130 is agriculture land. The rest is some floodplain and wooded areas around the Swabia Creek. And so we severed the development rights of 130 acres of this property, permanently preserving it with Lehigh County and the state of Pennsylvania. So now it's a preserved farm, and the township still owns it today. And so we're actually very close now to finalizing a deal with a 5th-generation Lower Macungie Township farmer to essentially sell the farm to this gentleman, and so he can keep it in productive farmland and agriculture moving forward as a permanently preserved farm.
Now, who were the Jarretts who first settled this section of land? They came in the early 1700s. They were a French Huguenot family from Alsace-Lorraine on the French-German border. They picked up land along the Swabia Creek Valley. That was a section, that's a major tributary of the Little Lehigh Creek. It's a section that has very, very good farmland, and it was comparable to the land that they had farmed back in their homeland in Europe. The family had received a land warrant from the Penn sons for 150 acres in 1735, which eventually became a much larger tract. Eventually the holdings of the Jarretts increased to 514 acres. Several sons of Johannes Jarrett served in the Northampton Town Militia during the Revolutionary War. Isaac Sr., 1728 to 1790, is believed to be the progenitor of the Jarrett family here in Lower Macungie Township. He and his wife, Catherine Wetzel, did a good job of producing generations. They had 14 children. At first, they would have built log houses and log barns for their animals, but then later in the 1700s, as their wealth increased, they started to build these rather handsome stone houses, some of which remain. Now, the one that this date stone came from, Isaac Sr.'s son was John, and he and his wife, Anna Maria, had 9 children. They built the 1804 house.
We got permission to remove the date stone which had been positioned between the top windows of the house that is still there in the Swabia Creek Valley off of Sauerkraut Lane.
And this is a replica. And the marks on the stone say built for the Jarretts by the master stonemason Conrad Neumoyer, who was a very well-known, very highly regarded stonemason in this area, who's responsible, and whose family sons are responsible for a number of the stone buildings, stone homes, mills, and barns in Lower Macungie Township.
So I am 6th-generation Jarrett descendant. The John Jarrett property, which was built in 1804, was an absolutely amazing, beautiful house. The windows had windowsills that were at least a foot deep. You walked in the front door and you were greeted with this amazing staircase that went up to the 2nd floor. So you had a full foyer with a beautiful staircase, and rooms, very large rooms on each side of the foyer. You could definitely imagine the one being a sitting room to entertain, and the other one on the other side would have been a formal dining room that then led to the kitchen. Off of the kitchen, there was also a back stairway that was often used, for perhaps the maid to go upstairs to a maid's quarters. So it was definitely evident by, looking inside the house that they were fairly well-to-do for the time.
Benjamin Jarrett inherited the 1804 house.
The farm passed through successive generations of family members, from Benjamin to Augustus, a dairy and potato farmer, and his wife Lavinia, to Elizabeth, Lizzie Jarrett, who married Charles Radler, to Howard Radler, and finally to David Radler, who was the last to farm the beautiful farm. In July 1915, the Jarrett-built stone barn, while owned by Charles Radler, was struck by lightning and burned to the ground. The fire was visible 15 miles away in Allentown. With the assistance of his son George, a World War I veteran, Charles promptly built a new frame barn with a gambrel roof. David Radler sold the farm to developer Dr. Edward Weiner in the 1980s. After the farm was sold, all of the structures on the property were neglected, vandalized, and left to deteriorate. In 2011, the second barn was destroyed by fire of unknown origin.
Isaac Sr.'s son, Henry Lighthorse Jarrett, played a prominent role in the Freeze Rebellion of the 1790s, served as Justice of the Peace, and later became Sheriff of Northampton County. In 1812, after Lehigh County was formed, he became an attorney in this county. His property is believed to have been near where Brookside Country Club was established along Brookside Road.
Former Jarrett Farm, which became a Lichtenwohner Farm in 1876, and across the street, across from Brookside, is an additional farm that's still part of the Jarrett Farm, but was also a Lichtenwohner Farm. And both of these are just north of the former Brookside Country Club clubhouse.
There were other Jarrett homes built in the surrounding area in this 350-acre tract, including the township building.
The structures in the approximately 1940. Originally, General Trexler loaned his horses to the Brookside Country Club to drag the fields to create the fairways and so forth, which would have been in the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s. My grandfather boarded the horses for the construction of the greens and so forth. The pool was built in 1940s. This area here is where the tennis courts currently exist. They originally were clay courts, and we ended up becoming friends with people that traveled all the way from California and slept in my father's fields while they played in tournaments at Brookside Country Club. So it was a popular club and known for its tournaments.
This is the original barn that Brookside Country Club bought in the property in 1929. As you can see how big it is. And when Brookside bought that, they cut off 8 feet of this barn to look like this.
I was one of the earlier, not the earliest, but one of the earlier house managers at the Brookside Country Club. That would be 1959, 1960, maybe 1963, in that era. And I came here for the job, and I came from Baltimore Road, and I turned left onto Brookside Road, and once you got past those few houses that are at Westcoastville, it was mostly farm fields out till we got to Lower Macungie, which had Ibox Tavern on the left, and the Shell Station, which never ever seemed to be open to me. And then more fields and farms until we came to the curve, and lo and behold, there was this big barn that was the country club. And I went in there, and it was a very a very rural, rustic sort of country club. The only reason the club was able to position itself the way it did was because there was no traffic on Brookside Road. Without even looking to just cross the road, it was sort of like that was part of the property. And occasionally, they'd be offended, you know, if a car came by.
So all of the factors we looked into it was advisable to go across the road and build a new clubhouse. All the studies we did, it had to make sense. And then also all the weddings we had all the time, they used to park up on the hill, and we had a driving range here, and they used to hit cars. It was time. Lower Macungie Township, they were way over in here with a small building. And we approached them for them a good price, and they sold it. And then we moved on April 24th, 1989.
The total area settled by and farmed by the Jarretts extended from beyond Macungie Road to Willow Lane, east-west, and Indian Creek Road to Sauerkraut Lane, north-south. Many generations of the Jarrett family prospered in the valley of the Swabia Creek. They were the predominant family of the central part of Lower Macungie Township and intermarried with many, if not most, of the other early families.
My great-grandfather was Walter Jarrett Sr., who owned the farm that we always called the Jarrett Homestead, but it is now owned by Annabelle Weiner. Yeah, so my grandmother, Maisie Jarrett, she was one of 6 children that were born on the kitchen table in that farmhouse. 5 children were her mother's. Walter Jarrett Sr., my great-grandfather who lived in the Jarrett Homestead, was a farmer as well as a butcher. He was quite well-to-do, and he was known in the community for being able to lend money to other people for purchases, large purchases. He provided for each one of his 5 children a house. His youngest son ended up with the farmhouse where they all grew up. So Walter Jr. was the baby of the family and was the last of the Jarretts that lived in the farmhouse, and he lived there until the 1990s. He did have a bigger offer for his property in the farmhouse from a local builder. But he knew that the builder planned to tear the farmhouse down and to subdivide the property to 3 acres, which was what was left of the farm. And he decided he didn't want that to happen to the remaining piece of the farm that was left. So he decided to sell it to a contractor who planned to restore the farmhouse so that it would be livable for another family for a lot less money. He proceeded to subdivide parts of the farm and sell them all piece by piece to the point that he only had 3.5 acres left.
We appreciate the efforts of the Township Commissioners to preserve this historic tract, one of the earliest settled tracts in Lower Macungie Township and one of the most fertile.